When Oliver came running up those basement stairs with his face drained of all color and his small hands trembling like autumn leaves, I knew something was catastrophically wrong. My 6-year-old grandson had always been a sensitive child, the kind who cried when he accidentally stepped on an ant, but I had never seen this level of terror in his eyes. He grabbed my wrist with both hands, his grip surprisingly strong for someone so small, and his voice came out in desperate whispers. "Grandma, we need to pack our bags, right now. We have to leave and we can't tell anyone." I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't the voice of a child playing pretend or exaggerating a scraped knee. This was genuine fear, the kind that makes your blood run cold even before you understand why. "Oliver, sweetheart, what happened?" I knelt down to his eye level, trying to keep my own panic from showing. "Did you hurt yourself down there?" He shook his head violently, tears starting to stream down his cheeks. "No, Grandma. There are bad men down there. They're doing bad things. Please, we need to go. Dad told me it was a secret, but it's wrong. It's all wrong." My heart started racing. Bad men? In my basement? The basement of the home I'd lived in for 35 years? What kind of bad men, honey? What did you see? "I can't explain it, but please don't go down there. Please, Grandma." "I'm so scared." His whole body was shaking now, and I pulled him into my arms, feeling his heart hammering against my chest. Every maternal instinct I possessed screamed at me to call the police immediately, but something made me pause. Oliver had mentioned his father, Marcus, my son-in-law. What did Marcus have to do with whatever was happening in my basement? "Oliver, where's your dad right now?" He hesitated, his face crumpling. "He's down there, with the men." "But Grandma, he doesn't know I saw everything. He thinks I just take pictures like he asked. But today I heard them talking, and I saw the boxes and that scary man with no hair, and I know it's bad. I know we're in danger." "Pictures? What pictures?" My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of fragments that didn't fit together. I held Oliver close and made my voice as calm as possible, even though my hands were shaking. "Okay, sweetheart, I need you to stay right here in the living room. Turn on the TV, watch your cartoons. Grandma needs to check something." "No!" He grabbed my arm again. "Don't go down there. What if they hurt you?" I cupped his face in my hands, looking into those terrified blue eyes that looked so much like my late husband's. "I'll be very quiet. They won't even know I'm there. But I need to understand what's happening before we do anything else. Can you be brave for me?" He nodded reluctantly, and I settled him on the couch with the remote control. My hands were trembling as I walked toward the basement door. I'd been down to that basement thousands of times over the decades. It was just storage space, old furniture, boxes of Christmas decorations, Richard's tools that I couldn't bring myself to donate after he died. Nothing sinister, nothing dangerous. But as I opened the door and started down those wooden stairs, stepping carefully to avoid the third step that always creaked, I felt a sense of dread so profound it made my legs weak. I could hear voices now, masculine voices echoing from somewhere deeper than my basement should go. How was that possible? I reached the bottom of the stairs and stood perfectly still, controlling my breathing, listening. The voices were coming from the far corner, behind the old shelving unit where we stored paint supplies. And then I saw it. The shelving unit had been moved aside, revealing a door in the wall, a door that had never been there before. Or had it always been there, hidden behind furniture I never moved? The door was open just enough for light to spill through, and I could hear Marcus's voice clearly now. "The timeline is tight, but we can make it work. 3 more shipments this month, then we're clear." Another voice, one I didn't recognize, heavily accented. European, cold. "You said clear 2 months ago, Marcus. Yet here we are, and I'm still waiting for my 340,000 euros. My heart nearly stopped. 340,000 euros? What in God's name was my son-in-law involved in? "I told you, Dimitri, the property sale takes time, but it's happening. My mother-in-law already sold her hotel. The money's liquid now." My hotel. He was talking about my hotel, the boutique property I'd built from nothing over 20 years, the business I'd poured my heart into, that I'd sold 8 months ago because Marcus convinced me I deserved to rest, to enjoy my retirement. $4.2 million that was supposed to secure my future and leave something substantial for Sienna and Oliver. And the tunnels? Dimitri's voice was businesslike, emotionless. Your little explorer has mapped them all? Marcus laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. Oliver's been very helpful. The kid thinks we're planning some surprise renovation for his grandmother. He has no idea what he's actually documenting. Oliver. They were talking about Oliver. My grandson, who I'd noticed coming home from special daddy time with dirt on his clothes and excited stories about exploring the secret fort in Grandma's basement. Marcus had been using a 6-year-old child to map whatever these tunnels were. I pressed myself against the wall, afraid to breathe, afraid to move. Through the gap in the door, I could see shadows moving, the silhouette of what looked like large crates or boxes being shifted. The provenance papers are solid, another voice said, younger, nervous. But if customs catches even one shipment, this whole operation collapses. They won't catch anything, Dimitri said flatly. These tunnels are from the Civil War era. No one even knows they exist except us. And once we acquire full access through property transfer, we'll have an untraceable route connecting directly to the commercial district. The Charleston black market will be ours. Property transfer. They were talking about my home, about taking my home. A fourth voice spoke up, and this one I recognized with a jolt that nearly made me gasp out loud. It was James Whitmore, the real estate attorney who'd helped me with the hotel sale. The man I'd trusted with my business dealings for 5 years. Perla's resisting the idea of selling the house, though. She's sentimental about it. We might need to apply more pressure. Leave that to me, Marcus said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. I have ways of making my mother-in-law see reason, especially once she understands that her daughter and grandson's safety might depend on her cooperation. The threat was veiled, but unmistakable. My vision blurred with rage and terror. This man, this person I'd welcomed into my family, who'd married my daughter, who'd fathered my grandson, was threatening us, using us, planning to steal my home and somehow force me to cooperate. I backed away from the door as quietly as I could, my mind racing. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to grab Oliver and flee just like he'd begged me to do. But where would we go? And what about Sienna? My daughter was at a work site 2 hours away, completely unaware that her husband was a criminal using our family as pawns in some kind of smuggling operation. I made it back up the stairs, my legs shaking so badly I had to grip the railing. Oliver was exactly where I'd left him, curled into a ball on the couch, not even watching the cartoon that played on the screen. When he saw my face, his eyes filled with fresh tears. You saw them, didn't you? I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. My throat felt tight, my chest constricted. I sat down next to him and pulled him close, and we held each other while my mind worked frantically through what I'd just learned. 340,000 euros in debt. Smuggling operations through Civil War tunnels under my house. Plans to force me to sell my property. Threats against Sienna and Oliver if I didn't cooperate. My trusted attorney working with criminals. And Marcus, charming Marcus, who'd convinced me to sell my business. Who'd isolated my daughter. Who'd been using my grandson as an unwitting accomplice. Grandma, what are we going to do? Oliver's voice was small and frightened. What were we going to do? I couldn't call the police without proof. I couldn't confront Marcus without putting us in immediate danger. I couldn't tell Sienna over the phone that her husband was a criminal without her thinking I'd finally lost my mind with grief and paranoia. But I also couldn't pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen, heard what I'd heard. My husband Richard had died 3 years ago in a boating accident that had never quite made sense. Richard, who'd been a meticulous accountant, who'd spent his last weeks looking stressed and distracted, who'd kept telling me there was something important we needed to discuss, but never got the chance. What if it hadn't been an accident? What if Richard had discovered something about Marcus, tried to confront him, and paid the ultimate price? The thought made me feel physically sick, but it also crystallized something inside me. A cold, hard determination that replaced the panic. Marcus had already taken my husband from me, stolen my business through manipulation, and now he thought he could take my home and threaten my family. I looked down at Oliver, at his tear-stained face and frightened eyes, and made a decision. We weren't running. We weren't hiding. But we also weren't confronting anyone until I had every piece of evidence I needed to destroy Marcus Brennan and everyone working with him. Oliver, sweetheart, I need you to do something very important for me. Can you be brave? He nodded, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. Remember those pictures you've been taking for your dad? The ones of the tunnels? His face went pale. I'm sorry, Grandma. I didn't know it was bad. Dad said it was a surprise for you, that we were planning something special. I know, honey. You didn't do anything wrong, but I need to see all those pictures, every single one. Can you show them to me? He reached for my iPad that he always used for his games and drawings. His small fingers swiped through the screens until he pulled up the photo album. My heart started pounding as I saw what was there. 47 photographs of underground tunnels, brick walls marked with old mortar, passages that looked like they stretched for hundreds of feet, crates with markings I didn't recognize, and in several photos, clear as day, the faces of men moving those crates, including Dimitri, the bald man with the cold voice, including my attorney, James Whitmore, time-stamped and date-stamped by the iPad's automatic settings. Oliver, these photos save to the cloud, don't they? To my account? He nodded. Yeah, everything automatically backs up to your cloud storage. That's why my games save even when I switch devices. Perfect. Even if they discovered the photos on the iPad and deleted them, I'd have copies in the cloud that they didn't know existed. It was the first piece of good fortune in this nightmare. I kissed the top of Oliver's head and stood up, my mind already racing through what needed to happen next. I needed more than just photos. I needed documentation, expert analysis, legal counsel I could actually trust. And I needed to do all of this without Marcus or his associates realizing I knew anything. The first call I made was to David Chen, an attorney who specialized in criminal financial cases. I'd worked with him years ago when we had a problem with embezzlement at the hotel. He was discreet, thorough, and importantly, he had no connection to Marcus or anyone in his circle. David, this is Perla Hotway. I need to see you immediately, today if possible, and I need this conversation to stay completely confidential. There must have been something in my voice because he didn't ask questions, just told me he could clear his schedule for 4 o'clock that afternoon. I had 3 hours to gather everything I could find. While Oliver watched television in a deliberate attempt at normalcy, I went to Richard's study, a room I'd barely entered since his death because the pain was too overwhelming. But now I needed to see what my husband might have left behind. The mahogany desk was exactly as he'd left it, papers still in neat stacks, pens in the holder he'd used for 30 years. The safe was hidden behind a painting of the Charleston Harbor, a landscape Richard had bought at an art auction during our anniversary trip. My hands shook as I entered the combination, our wedding date that I'd avoided using for 3 years because it hurt too much. Inside, I found exactly what I both hoped for and dreaded. A manila folder, thick with documents, bank statements with highlighted transactions, transfers from accounts I recognized as belonging to Sienna and Marcus. 80,000 euros, moved in increments over 6 months, all flowing into offshore accounts that Richard had meticulously traced. There were handwritten notes in Richard's precise script. Confrontation scheduled for June 15th. Evidence compiled for attorney review. Must protect Perla and Sienna from financial exposure. Marcus Brennan gambling debts confirmed through 3 separate sources. Richard had died on June 14th. The day before, he was supposed to confront Marcus about the stolen money. I sat in his chair and let the tears come, pressing my fist against my mouth to keep from sobbing out loud. My husband had known. He'd been trying to protect us, and it had cost him everything. The accidental boat explosion that the investigators had ruled as a fuel leak suddenly seemed far more sinister. But Richard had also left me weapons. Documentation, evidence, a trail of breadcrumbs that proved Marcus was a criminal long before the smuggling operation. It was enough to start building a case, especially combined with Oliver's photographs. I gathered everything carefully, making copies of the most important documents before returning the originals to the safe. Then, I did something I should have done years ago when my instincts first told me something was wrong with my son-in-law. I trusted myself. By the time Marcus came up from the basement that afternoon, his charming smile in place and his expensive suit perfectly pressed, I was sitting calmly at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a cookbook open in front of me. Perla, good afternoon. How was your day? I looked up at him and smiled, every ounce of hatred carefully hidden behind practiced civility. Lovely Marcus. Oliver and I had a wonderful time together. He's such a curious child, always exploring and learning. Something flickered in his eyes. Concern? Suspicion? But his smile never wavered. That he is. Where is the little explorer now? Taking a nap. All that playing wore him out. The lie came easily. Oliver was actually in my bedroom, door locked, under strict instructions not to come out until I got him. Marcus nodded, but I could see him calculating something behind those cold blue eyes. Well, I should collect him soon. Sienna will be home tonight and she'll want to see him. Of course. Give me just a few minutes to wake him gently. As Marcus walked out to take a phone call in the garden, I allowed myself one moment of pure rage. This man had murdered my husband, stolen from my daughter, exploited my grandson, and thought he could manipulate me into giving up my home. He'd even threatened our safety if I didn't cooperate with whatever twisted plan he and his criminal associates had devised. But Marcus Brennan had made one critical miscalculation. He'd assumed that because I was a widow in my 50s, because I'd stepped back from my business, because I'd been paralyzed by grief for 3 years, I was weak, controllable, an easy target. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I ignored, all the red flags I dismissed because I didn't want to be that mother-in-law, the interfering one, the one who couldn't let go and trust her daughter's choices. But my instincts had been screaming at me since the day Sienna brought Marcus home 7 years ago. She was 25 then, fresh from completing her master's in architecture at Columbia, brilliant and beautiful, and so heartbreakingly naive about men. Marcus was 31, already established as a luxury real estate broker in Charleston, driving a BMW he couldn't actually afford, and wearing watches that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He had that polished charm that some men cultivate like armor, the kind that makes women feel special while simultaneously making them doubt their own judgment. Richard saw through him immediately. My husband had spent 40 years as a forensic accountant, and he could spot financial irregularities in a person's lifestyle the way doctors spot symptoms of disease. After the third family dinner with Marcus, Richard pulled me aside in our kitchen and said something I'll never forget. "That man is living beyond his means, Perla. The car, the clothes, the restaurants he takes Sienna to. His commission structure doesn't support that lifestyle. He's either in debt or he's getting money from somewhere he shouldn't be." I'd defended Marcus then, told Richard he was being paranoid, that successful young professionals often leveraged credit to build their image. God, I wish I'd listened. I wish I'd trusted the man who'd never steered me wrong in 32 years of marriage. But Sienna was so happy, and I wanted her happiness more than I wanted to be right. So when Marcus proposed after only 8 months of dating, I smiled and hugged them both and threw an engagement party at my boutique hotel that cost $40,000. I invited 200 guests and pretended not to notice that Marcus's side of the room was mostly work colleagues and almost no family. His parents were dead, he said. Car accident when he was 19. No siblings. Just a few distant cousins he wasn't close to. Richard did a background check anyway. I was furious with him at the time, thought he was overstepping, but he showed me what he found. Marcus's father hadn't died in a car accident. He'd committed suicide after losing everything to gambling debts. The mother had died 6 months later from an overdose that was ruled accidental but looked suspiciously intentional. Marcus had grown up watching his father destroy their family one bet at a time. "He's got the same sickness," Richard told me. "I've seen this pattern before. Children of gambling addicts either become completely risk-averse or they inherit the compulsion. Marcus is the latter. I'd stake my career on it. I should have told Sienna. I should have sat my daughter down and shared what we'd learned, let her make an informed decision about whether to marry this man. But she was 26 and in love, and I convinced myself that Richard was wrong, that Marcus had overcome his childhood trauma, that love could conquer old demons. The wedding was beautiful. Sienna wore my mother's vintage lace veil, and Marcus cried actual tears when she walked down the aisle. Maybe some of it was real. Maybe he did love her in whatever capacity a man like that can love. But 3 months after they married, Richard came home from lunch with a colleague who worked in banking, and his face was gray. "Marcus took out a home equity line of credit on the house Sienna inherited from your mother. $400,000. Sienna doesn't know. That was when I finally admitted Richard had been right all along. We confronted Sienna together, as gently as we could, and watched our daughter's face crumble as she realized her husband had forged her signature on loan documents, using her inheritance as collateral without her knowledge or consent. She was pregnant with Oliver by then, 5 months along, and the stress sent her blood pressure dangerously high. Marcus had an explanation ready, of course. He always did. The money was for a real estate investment opportunity that would triple their returns. He'd been planning to surprise Sienna with the profits. He was protecting her from the stress of the risk during her pregnancy. He cried, apologized, promised it would never happen again. Sienna, hormonal and exhausted and desperate to believe her marriage wasn't a mistake, forgave him. Richard didn't. My husband spent the next 2 years quietly monitoring Marcus's finances, documenting irregularities, building a case. He found offshore accounts, traced suspicious transactions, discovered that Marcus had been systematically stealing from Sienna's trust fund that her grandmother had left her. 80,000 euros, moved in small increments to make it less noticeable, funneled into accounts connected to gambling websites and loan services. Richard was preparing to present everything to Sienna when Marcus suggested the 4 of us take a weekend boating trip. A chance to rebuild family trust, he said. Richard didn't want to go, but I convinced him that maybe Marcus was genuinely trying to change, that we should give him one more chance for Sienna's sake. The boat exploded on the second day. Marcus and I were on the dock buying supplies. Richard and Sienna were supposed to be on board, but she'd gone back to the hotel room for Oliver's medicine. My husband was alone when the fuel tank ignited. The investigators ruled it accidental, said Richard must have been checking the engine and triggered a spark near a leak. But Richard had been a sailor for 40 years. He was meticulous about boat safety, obsessive about checking for fuel leaks. And Marcus had been the one to rent that specific boat, insisting it was the best one available, even though Richard had preferred a different vessel. I couldn't prove anything. The explosion destroyed most of the evidence, and without Richard's testimony about what he'd discovered, I had no way to demonstrate Marcus's motive for murder. I was paralyzed by grief, barely functional for months. Sienna was devastated, blaming herself for going back for the medicine, for not being there, for surviving when her father didn't. And Marcus was there, supportive and attentive and helpful. He took care of funeral arrangements, handled Richard's estate paperwork, made sure Sienna and I didn't have to deal with logistical nightmares while we mourned. He moved Sienna and 3-year-old Oliver into the converted annex of my property so I wouldn't be alone in the big house. On the surface, he was the perfect son-in-law, stepping up in our darkest hour. But I watched him, and I saw things that didn't quite fit. The way he went through Richard's study before I could, claiming he was organizing papers to help me. The way certain documents from Richard's safe disappeared before I even knew to look for them. The way he started subtly suggesting that running the boutique hotel was too stressful for me, that I should consider selling while the market was strong, that I deserved to rest and enjoy my remaining years. 6 months after Richard's death, Marcus introduced me to James Whitmore, a real estate attorney who supposedly specialized in hospitality properties. James was smooth and professional, and he presented a compelling case for why selling the hotel was my best financial move. The business was strong, he said, which meant I could command a premium price. But the hospitality industry was changing rapidly, and if I waited too long, I might miss the window of maximum value. I resisted for 2 years. That hotel was my legacy, the business I'd built from a rundown Victorian property into a destination boutique experience. I'd poured 20 years of my life into every detail, from the restoration of original crown molding to the curated art collection in each room. It was supposed to be Sienna's inheritance, the security I could provide for her and Oliver, even after I was gone. But Marcus was patient and persistent. He brought me projections showing market downturns. He mentioned my age, suggested I was getting too old to handle the stress. He talked about how much time I was missing with Oliver because I was always working. And slowly, worn down by grief and exhaustion and his relentless logic, I started to believe him. The sale closed 8 months ago, $4.2 million, which seemed like a fortune until I paid off the mortgage, settled the business debts, and allocated funds for taxes. I walked away with $2.8 million in liquid assets invested in funds that Marcus and James recommended. Safe, they said. Conservative growth with strong returns. I should have known better. I should have gotten a second opinion from someone who wasn't in Marcus's pocket. But I was tired and lonely, and I wanted to trust that my son-in-law had my best interests at heart, that he loved my daughter and grandson enough to protect our family's financial security. Instead, he'd orchestrated everything: the pressure to sell, the attorney who handled the transaction, probably even the buyers themselves, all part of some larger scheme I was only beginning to understand. He'd needed my money liquid and accessible, needed me out of the hotel business and dependent on investment income he controlled. And I'd given him exactly what he wanted, because I was too grief-stricken and too proud to admit that Richard had been right about Marcus from the very beginning. My husband had died trying to protect us from this man, and I'd spent 3 years helping Marcus consolidate his control over our family's assets. The guilt was crushing, but it also fueled something harder and colder inside me. Marcus thought he'd won. He thought he'd successfully manipulated a grieving widow into giving up her power, her business, her autonomy. He thought I was too broken, too trusting, too old to fight back. He was about to learn that grief doesn't make you weak. Sometimes it just makes you patient. And I'd spent 3 years learning to be very, very patient. Now, holding evidence of his crimes in my hands and watching him play the devoted son-in-law in my kitchen, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Richard's death. I felt dangerous. The meeting with David Chen that afternoon changed everything. I'd taken Oliver with me, refusing to leave him alone in the house with Marcus still lurking around. My grandson sat quietly in David's waiting room, playing educational games on the iPad that now contained evidence worth more than any game could ever be. David's office was in a discreet building downtown, away from the main legal district where Marcus and his associates might have contacts. When I walked in with my folder of documents and my grandson's photographs, David took one look at my face and immediately called his paralegal to cancel his remaining appointments for the day. "Tell me everything," he said simply. And I did. I laid out Richard's documentation first, the bank statements showing 80,000 euros stolen from Sienna's trust fund, the traced connections to offshore gambling accounts, the timeline showing Richard had scheduled a confrontation with Marcus for June 15th and had died on June 14th. David's expression grew darker with each piece of paper I placed on his desk. Then I showed him Oliver's photographs. 47 images of tunnels that shouldn't exist, crates that shouldn't be there, faces of men involved in activities that were clearly criminal. I played him the recording I'd made on my phone that morning, standing at the top of the basement stairs, capturing Marcus's voice, discussing 340,000 euros in debt and property transfers, and using my grandson as an unwitting accomplice. David listened to the entire recording without interrupting, his jaw tightening when Marcus mentioned threatening Sienna and Oliver's safety to ensure my cooperation. When it finished, he sat back in his leather chair and was quiet for a long moment. "Perla, what you've uncovered here is far more serious than simple fraud. This is organized crime, money laundering at minimum, possibly art smuggling based on those crate markings. And if your suspicions about Richard's death are correct, we're talking about murder." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "This is federal jurisdiction. We need to involve the FBI." My hands started shaking. The FBI. It felt surreal, like something from a television drama rather than my actual life. But David was right. This was so far beyond anything I could handle alone. "What about Sienna?" I asked. "She's 2 hours away at a work site. She has no idea what her husband is involved in. And she's pregnant, David. 4 months pregnant, though she hasn't told anyone yet. I found a positive pregnancy test in her bathroom last week when I was helping her organize." David's expression softened. "We'll need to bring her in carefully. But Perla, you need to understand something. When the FBI investigates organized crime, they look at everyone with access to the operation, spouses included. Sienna will be questioned extensively to determine if she had any knowledge of Marcus's activities." The thought made me sick. My daughter, who worked 60-hour weeks designing sustainable buildings, who spent her free time volunteering with Habitat for Humanity, who couldn't even lie about liking a birthday gift she hated. The idea of her being interrogated as a potential criminal accomplice was absurd. "She doesn't know anything," I said firmly. "Sienna's been so focused on her career that she barely notices what's happening in her own marriage. She travels constantly, trusts Marcus to handle their finances, assumes the best of everyone. That's why he targeted her in the first place. She was vulnerable and wealthy and too kind to see him for what he really is." David nodded. "I believe you. But we'll need to prove her innocence while building the case against Marcus. That means moving carefully. No confrontations, no letting him know you're aware of anything. Can you do that? Can you go home and pretend everything is normal while we build this case?" I thought about Marcus's cold eyes calculating behind his charming smile, about his threat to harm Sienna and Oliver if I didn't cooperate with selling my home, about Richard lying dead in a morgue because he tried to confront this man directly. "I can do whatever needs to be done to protect my family," I said quietly. "Tell me what you need from me." David spent the next hour outlining a plan. He would contact a friend at the FBI who specialized in organized crime and art smuggling. They would need to verify the tunnel system, identify the men in Oliver's photographs, trace the financial connections to determine who Dimitri really was and what organization he represented. All of that would take time, possibly weeks. In the meantime, I needed to act completely normal. Continue my daily routines. Don't search the basement again. Don't ask Marcus suspicious questions. Don't tell Sienna anything that might change her behavior toward her husband and alert him that something was wrong. "What about Oliver?" I asked. "Marcus has been using him to map those tunnels. What if he tries to send him down there again? Tell Marcus that Oliver had nightmares about the basement and you'd prefer he play elsewhere for a while. Keep it casual, motherly concern rather than accusation. And under no circumstances let Oliver be alone with his father until this is resolved." I left David's office with a plan, but also with crushing weight of responsibility. I had to lie to my daughter, act normal around the man who'd probably murdered my husband, and protect my grandson without revealing that I knew anything. The next few weeks were going to require performance skills I wasn't sure I possessed. Sienna came home that evening exhausted from her work site, her pregnant belly just starting to show beneath her loose architect's clothing. She hugged me tight when she walked in, and I had to fight the urge to tell her everything, to warn her, to make her understand the danger we were all in. "How was Oliver today?" she asked, dropping her bag on the kitchen counter. "Marcus said you two had a nice time together." "We did," I lied smoothly, "though he had some bad dreams about the basement. I think maybe all that exploring down there has gotten his imagination working overtime. I told Marcus maybe they should find different activities for their father-son time." Sienna frowned slightly. "Bad dreams? Oliver hasn't mentioned anything to me. You know how he is, sensitive. He probably didn't want to worry you." I poured her a glass of water, noting how tired she looked. "How's the project going?" She launched into details about structural challenges and permit delays, and I listened and nodded and pretended my world wasn't crumbling around us. Marcus joined us for dinner, his charm on full display, asking about Sienna's work and suggesting they plan a family vacation once her project wrapped up. "Maybe Hawaii," he said. "Somewhere relaxing where we could all reconnect." I smiled and agreed that Hawaii sounded lovely, all while thinking about how he planned to steal my house and threaten my family. The cognitive dissonance was dizzying. That night, after Sienna and Marcus had returned to the annex and Oliver was asleep in my guest room where I'd insisted he stay, I sat alone in Richard's study and finally let myself cry, deep, wrenching sobs that I muffled with my hand so Oliver wouldn't hear. I cried for my husband who'd tried to save us, for my daughter who'd married a monster, for my grandson who'd been used as a tool in criminal activities, for myself and the trust I'd lost in my own judgment. But by morning, I'd locked the grief away again and put on my mask of normalcy. I made breakfast, drove Oliver to school, attended my book club meeting like I did every Wednesday, and smiled at my neighbors when they asked how I was doing. No one could know that beneath the surface, I was gathering weapons for war. David called 3 days later with news. The FBI was interested, very interested. They'd identified Dmitry Volkov from Oliver's photographs as a known associate of Russian organized crime groups operating in the southeastern United States. He was wanted for questioning in connection with several art theft cases across Europe. The tunnels under my property were apparently part of a much larger smuggling network that had been operating in Charleston for years. They want to place surveillance in your home, David told me. Cameras and audio recording devices that will capture Marcus and his associates discussing their operations. But Perla, this is where it gets complicated. You'd need to continue living there, acting completely normal, while federal agents monitor everything that happens in your house. Can you handle that? The idea of strangers watching my daily life was unsettling, but the idea of Marcus getting away with everything was worse. When do they want to start? Tomorrow. They'll come when Marcus and Sienna are at work. Oliver's at school. They'll install everything in under 3 hours. You won't even be able to tell the cameras are there. The next morning, I let 3 FBI agents into my home. They were professional and efficient, installing tiny cameras in the basement, the kitchen, the living room, even in the garden where Marcus often took phone calls. They placed audio recording devices that looked like electrical outlets. They gave me a panic button disguised as a pendant necklace that would bring agents running if I pressed it. We'll be monitoring 24/7, Agent Sarah Mitchell told me. She was in her 40s, with kind eyes that reminded me of Sienna. If at any point you feel unsafe, press that button. We'll have people here in under 90 seconds. What about my daughter? I asked. When will she need to know about all of this? We'll bring her in for questioning once we have enough evidence to move forward with arrests. Until then, the fewer people who know about the investigation, the better. I know that's hard, especially with family, but her safety depends on Marcus not suspecting anything. So I went back to my performance. I smiled at Marcus when he came for dinner. I discussed landscaping plans and Oliver's upcoming birthday party. I even agreed when he suggested that I meet with a financial advisor he recommended, someone who could help me maximize returns on my hotel sale proceeds. I took the advisor's business card and thanked Marcus for thinking of me, all while knowing the advisor was probably another criminal associate trying to gain access to my money. A week into the surveillance, something shifted. Marcus started acting strangely, more tense than usual. He spent hours on phone calls in languages I didn't recognize, speaking in hushed tones, even when he thought no one was listening. The FBI cameras caught all of it. He had meetings in my basement with Dimitri and others, discussing timelines and shipments and something about accelerating the property acquisition. Agent Mitchell called to tell me they'd intercepted communications, suggesting Marcus was under increasing pressure from Dimitri to deliver on his promises. The €340,000 debt was apparently owed to a larger organization that didn't tolerate delays. Marcus had promised them access to the tunnel system through complete ownership of my property, and they were demanding he deliver. We think he's going to make a move soon, Sarah said. Some kind of pressure play to force you to sell. Be prepared for anything, but remember, don't break character. Let him make his move while we're watching. The move came 3 days later. I was in my garden, pruning roses in the late afternoon sun, when Marcus walked over with an expression of practiced concern. Behind him, I could see Sienna looking worried, holding Oliver's hand. Perla, could we talk for a moment? All of us together. It's important. My heart started racing, but I kept my voice calm. Of course. Let's go inside. We gathered in the living room, and I was acutely aware of the hidden cameras recording everything. Marcus sat forward in his chair, his hands clasped together in what I'm sure he thought was a gesture of sincerity. Perla, I need to talk to you about something serious, your health and safety. He paused for effect. Sienna and I have been discussing this, and we're concerned about you living alone in this big house at your age. The stairs, the maintenance, the isolation. What if something happened and no one was here to help you? I felt anger flash through me, but kept my expression neutral. I'm 58 years old, Marcus. Hardly decrepit. Of course not, he said smoothly. But we want what's best for you, and we think it might be time to consider downsizing. Maybe a nice condo in a community with other people your age, somewhere with security, medical staff on call, activities. He was describing a retirement community, trying to make me sound elderly and incompetent, like I needed assisted living. Sienna looked uncomfortable, but didn't contradict him. The thing is, Marcus continued, the real estate market right now is incredibly strong for historic properties like this one. I actually have a buyer who's interested, someone willing to pay well above market value. We could get you set up somewhere beautiful and comfortable, and you'd have substantial funds left over to ensure your future security. There it was, the pressure play Agent Mitchell had predicted. Marcus was trying to manipulate me into selling my home by framing it as concern for my well-being, with Sienna as his unwitting accomplice. I looked at my daughter and saw the worry in her eyes, genuine concern that her mother might be struggling alone in this big house. "How much above market value?" I asked, playing along. Marcus's eyes lit up. 2.1 million. For a property this size and location, that's exceptional. My client is very motivated. 2.1 million for a house worth at least 3 million. And I'd bet anything the motivated client was actually one of Dimitri's associates, buying the property to secure permanent access to the smuggling tunnels. They'd probably already promised Marcus a cut of the profits, enough to pay off his gambling debts and keep the operation running. "I'll need to think about it," I said carefully. "This house has a lot of memories. It's not an easy decision." Something flickered in Marcus's expression. Frustration, quickly masked. "Of course, but the buyer needs an answer soon. Maybe by the end of the week? I'd hate for you to miss this opportunity." The end of the week. 5 days. They were pushing hard, which meant something had changed. Either Dimitri was applying more pressure, or they'd discovered that Oliver had told me about the basement, or they suspected I knew more than I was letting on. That night, after everyone had left, Agent Mitchell called. "We heard everything. You did great. But Perla, I need to tell you something. We intercepted a communication between Marcus and Dimitri. They're planning to move a major shipment through the tunnels this Friday night. Millions of dollars worth of stolen art from a museum heist in Prague. If we can catch them in the act with that shipment, we'll have everything we need for arrests." "Friday is 4 days away," I said. "What do I do until then?" "Exactly what you've been doing. And on Friday night, you need to be somewhere else, out of the house entirely. We'll have a tactical team in place to intercept the shipment and arrest everyone involved. It's going to be loud and dangerous, and I need you and Oliver far away from it." I thought about Sienna, pregnant, and living in the annex with no idea that her husband was about to be arrested by the FBI. What about my daughter? "We'll extract her Friday afternoon. Bring her in for questioning and keep her at the field office until the operation is complete. She'll be safe, and we'll have agents with her when she learns the truth." 4 more days of pretending. 4 more days of smiling at the man who'd murdered my husband and threatened my family. 4 more days of watching my pregnant daughter sleep next to a criminal without being able to warn her. I could do it. I'd come this far. I could hold on for 4 more days. But on Thursday afternoon, everything fell apart. Oliver came running into my kitchen after school, his face pale and frightened, and said 5 words that made my blood run cold. "Grandma, Dad knows about the photos." My hand froze halfway to the teacup I'd been reaching for. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "What photos?" Oliver's voice came out in a terrified whisper. "The ones on your iPad. Dad asked to see it this morning to show me something, and he saw them. The pictures I took in the tunnels. He didn't say anything, but his face got really scary. Then he asked me if I'd shown anyone the photos. I lied and said no. But Grandma, I think he knows I told you." My heart was hammering so hard I could barely think. I pulled Oliver close, my mind racing through implications. If Marcus knew about the photos, he knew I had evidence. If he suspected Oliver had told me what he'd seen in the basement, then our entire careful plan was compromised. Marcus was desperate and in debt to dangerous people. Desperate men do terrible things. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and texted David Chen a single word: compromised. Then I pressed the panic button hidden in my necklace pendant, the one Agent Mitchell had given me for emergencies. "Oliver, we need to leave right now. Don't ask questions. Just trust me." I grabbed my purse and car keys, my phone, the folder of documents I'd hidden in the kitchen drawer for exactly this scenario. "We're going for a drive." But as we headed toward the front door, I heard a car pulling into the driveway. Through the window, I saw Marcus getting out, home hours earlier than he should be. And he wasn't alone. Dimitri emerged from the passenger seat, his massive frame unmistakable. "Back door," I whispered urgently to Oliver, changing direction. We moved quickly through the kitchen toward the rear entrance that led to the garden. But as I reached for the handle, I heard Marcus's voice behind us. "Perla, stop." I turned slowly, positioning myself between Oliver and Marcus. My son-in-law stood in the kitchen doorway, and the charming mask he always wore had completely fallen away. His face was cold, calculated, and for the first time I saw the real person underneath all those years of performance. "Going somewhere?" he asked quietly. "Just taking Oliver out for ice cream. He's had a difficult day at school." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Don't insult my intelligence. I know you've seen the basement. I know Oliver told you everything, and I know you've been gathering evidence against me." He took a step closer. "The question is, who have you told? Who else knows?" Behind him, Dimitri appeared in the doorway, blocking that escape route as well. We were trapped. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, but Marcus laughed. "You're a terrible liar, Perla. You always have been. That's one of the things Richard used to say about you. My wife's face shows every emotion she's ever felt." He said it like it was a compliment, but really, it was a weakness. Marcus's expression hardened. "Did you know Richard called me the night before the boat trip? Said he had evidence of financial crimes, that he was going to expose me, get me arrested. He gave me a choice: disappear from Sienna's life voluntarily or face prosecution." My breath caught. "You killed him. It wasn't an accident." "I made a choice," Marcus said flatly. "Richard or my marriage and my freedom. It wasn't personal. He was just in the way." He glanced at Oliver, who was trembling behind me. "Kind of like you are now." The casual way he admitted to murdering my husband, the emotionless delivery, made my stomach turn. This wasn't a man who could be reasoned with or appealed to. This was a predator who'd already killed once and clearly had no qualms about doing it again. "Marcus, please. Oliver is your son. Whatever you're angry about, he's innocent in all of this." "Oliver is a problem," Marcus said coldly. "A 6-year-old who can't keep secrets, who runs to Grandma with everything he sees. I should never have used him to map the tunnels. That was a mistake." He pulled something from his jacket pocket, and my blood turned to ice when I saw it was a gun. "But I can fix mistakes." Dimitri shifted behind Marcus, and I noticed he looked uncomfortable for the first time. "This was not the agreement," Dimitri said, his accented voice tense. "You said you could control your family. You said no violence would be necessary." "Plans change," Marcus snapped. "She's been gathering evidence, probably talking to lawyers or FBI. We can't let her destroy everything we've built." I was calculating distances, wondering if I could get Oliver out the back door before Marcus could react. But as if reading my thoughts, Marcus raised the gun slightly. "Don't even think about it. Sit down, both of you. We're going to wait here until I figure out exactly how much damage you've done." That's when I heard the most beautiful sound in my life. Sirens. Multiple sirens, getting rapidly closer. The panic button I'd pressed must have brought every available agent racing to my location. Marcus's face went white. "What did you do?" "Federal surveillance," I said, and I couldn't keep the satisfaction out of my voice. "They've been watching you for over a week. Every conversation, every meeting in the basement, every word you just said about murdering my husband. They have it all, Marcus. It's over." He looked at the gun in his hand, then at the front door where red and blue lights were flashing through the windows. Dimitri was already backing away, hands raised, clearly deciding that whatever loyalty he had to Marcus wasn't worth a shootout with federal agents. "You destroyed me," Marcus said, and for the first time I heard something like real emotion in his voice. "You destroyed my marriage, my life, everything." "No," I said quietly. "You destroyed yourself. I just made sure you couldn't take my family down with you." The front door burst open and FBI agents poured in, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Marcus dropped the gun and put his hands up, but his eyes stayed locked on mine with pure hatred. As they handcuffed him and read him his rights, Agent Mitchell appeared at my side. "Are you hurt? Is Oliver okay?" I nodded, my legs suddenly weak now that the adrenaline was fading. Oliver was crying, and I pulled him close, shielding his eyes from the sight of his father being arrested. This moment would scar him, I knew that, but at least he'd be alive to heal from it. "There's something else," Agent Mitchell said quietly. "We arrested James Whitmore an hour ago at his office, and we've located the art shipment. It was already in the tunnels, just like our intelligence suggested. We're executing the raid tonight instead of tomorrow." "What about Sienna?" I asked. "Does she know yet?" "We have agents bringing her here now." She needs to know everything before she hears it on the news. Agent Mitchell paused. I'm sorry, Perla. I know this isn't how you wanted her to find out. Through the window, I saw another car pulling up. My daughter got out, confusion and fear written across her face as she took in the scene of FBI vehicles and agents swarming her childhood home. She saw Marcus in handcuffs being led to a police car, and her hand went instinctively to her pregnant belly. The moment our eyes met, I saw her world shatter, and all I could do was hold my arms open and wait for her to fall. Sienna collapsed into my arms on the front lawn, her whole body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and primal. FBI agents moved around us like a choreographed dance, executing their raid, securing evidence. But all I could focus on was my daughter's anguished cries and the way she kept repeating, "No, no, no," like a prayer that might somehow rewind time. Agent Mitchell gave us space for a few moments before gently touching Sienna's shoulder. "Ms. Brennan, I need you to come with me. We have a lot to discuss, and you'll want to sit down for this." "Is it true?" Sienna pulled back from me, her face blotchy and streaked with tears. "They said Marcus was arrested. They said federal charges. Mom, what's happening?" I cupped her face in my hands. "It's true, sweetheart. All of it. But you need to hear everything from the beginning. Agent Mitchell will explain. They brought us to the FBI field office downtown, setting us up in a conference room with bottles of water and boxes of tissues that Sienna went through with alarming speed. Oliver sat pressed against my side, silent and traumatized, while Agent Mitchell laid out the entire case with methodical precision. The gambling debts that Marcus had hidden for years, the 340,000 euros owed to Dmitry Volkov's criminal organization, the discovery of Civil War-era tunnels under my property that connected to valuable commercial buildings downtown, the plan to use those tunnels for smuggling operations, specifically stolen art from European museums and private collections. "Your husband has been operating this scheme for approximately 18 months, Agent Mitchell explained, her voice professionally compassionate. "He used your son Oliver to map the tunnel system, telling the child it was a game or a surprise for his grandmother." Sienna made a sound like she'd been punched. "He used Oliver? He put our 6-year-old son in danger for his criminal activities?" "I'm afraid so. We have photographic evidence that Oliver took showing the tunnels, the smuggled merchandise, and several of Marcus's associates, including Dmitry Volkov." Agent Mitchell paused. "There's more, and it's difficult. Your mother has evidence suggesting that your father's death 3 years ago may not have been accidental." I watched the color drain from Sienna's face. "What are you saying?" So I told her. About the documents Richard had compiled showing Marcus stealing 80,000 euros from her trust fund. About Richard's plan to confront Marcus the day after the boat trip. About Marcus's confession just hours ago, recorded by FBI surveillance, admitting he'd sabotaged the boat to eliminate the threat Richard posed. "He killed Dad." Sienna's voice was hollow, emotionless with shock. "He murdered my father and then comforted me at the funeral. He held me while I cried and told me it would be okay, and the whole time he was the one who'd done it. We'll be charging him with first-degree murder in addition to the federal charges," Agent Mitchell said. "Your mother's testimony, combined with the recorded confession and our investigation into the boat explosion, should be sufficient for prosecution." Sienna turned to look at me, and I saw 1,000 questions in her eyes. "How long have you known?" "I suspected something was wrong from the beginning," I admitted. "Your father tried to warn me. I didn't listen, and he died for it. But I only found proof 2 weeks ago when Oliver came running up from the basement terrified and told me there were bad men down there." 2 weeks. Sienna's voice cracked. "You've known for 2 weeks and didn't tell me?" "We advised her not to," Agent Mitchell interjected. "For your safety and for the integrity of the investigation. We needed to determine your level of involvement or knowledge before bringing you in." "My level of involvement?" Sienna looked stunned. "You thought I was part of this? You thought I knew my husband was a criminal and a murderer?" "We had to investigate all possibilities," Agent Mitchell said gently. "But it's clear from everything we've found that you had no knowledge of Marcus's activities. Your financial records show no suspicious transactions. Your work schedule demonstrates you were rarely home when meetings or smuggling activities occurred. You're not facing any charges, Ms. Brennan." "How generous," Sienna said bitterly. Then she turned back to me, and I saw anger mixing with the pain in her eyes. But you, Mom, you're my mother. You should have told me. You should have warned me. Instead, you let me keep sleeping next to him, kept pretending everything was fine. The accusation stung because it was partially true. I was trying to protect you and the baby. If you'd known and changed your behavior toward Marcus, he would have suspected something. And he was dangerous, Sienna. He had a gun. He threatened Oliver and me today before the FBI arrested him. If he'd known you were aware of his crimes, I don't know what he would have done. The baby. Sienna's hand went to her stomach, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Oh God, the baby. I'm 4 months pregnant with the child of a murderer. How am I supposed to process that? I moved to hold her, but she pulled away. Don't. I can't right now. I need to think. Agent Mitchell cleared her throat. I'm afraid there's more you both need to know. The raid on the tunnels is happening as we speak. We've recovered approximately $8 million worth of stolen artwork, including pieces from a museum in Prague, a private collection in Vienna, and several items taken from estates during the European refugee crisis. The smuggling network Marcus was connected to is international and extremely sophisticated. She pulled up photographs on a laptop showing the tunnel system in detail. The images revealed passages that looked like they'd been carved during the Civil War era, brick archways with old mortar, spaces that had remained hidden for more than a century. In recent months, someone had installed lighting, reinforced weak points, and created storage areas for the stolen goods. Your property, Mrs. Hotway, sits at the nexus of this network. The tunnels connect to 3 major commercial buildings downtown, including a former bank building now housing a high-end restaurant, an old train station converted to an art gallery, and a waterfront warehouse. Marcus planned to force you to sell the house so his organization could gain permanent, unquestioned access to these tunnels. The hotel sale, I said suddenly, pieces clicking into place. He pressured me to sell my business 8 months ago. That was about getting liquid assets he could access, wasn't it? Agent Mitchell nodded. Partially. We believe he needed to demonstrate to Dimitri's organization that he had access to significant funds. The hotel sale made you appear wealthier and more vulnerable to financial manipulation. It also removed your primary source of independent income, making you more dependent on investment returns that Marcus and his associate James Whitmore controlled. James was involved too? I felt sick. I'd trusted that man with my business affairs for years. James Whitmore was arrested this afternoon. He's been cooperative, providing information about the money laundering operation in exchange for a reduced sentence. According to his testimony, Marcus approached him 4 years ago with a proposal to help wealthy clients move money offshore. It evolved from there into active criminal conspiracy. 4 years ago, before Sienna and Marcus even got married. My son-in-law had been a criminal long before he joined our family, and we'd been marks from the beginning. The realization was devastating. A junior agent knocked on the conference room door. Agent Mitchell, we need you. There's been a development with the tunnel raid. Sarah Mitchell's expression tightened. Excuse me for a moment. She stepped out, leaving Sienna and me in heavy silence. Oliver had fallen asleep against my shoulder, exhausted by trauma. My daughter stared at the table, her hands protectively cradling her pregnant belly. I loved him, she finally whispered. I really loved him, Mom. I thought we had problems, but I believed marriage was work, and you pushed through the difficult parts. I thought the distance between us was my fault for working too much, for not being attentive enough. Now I find out he was a monster the entire time. Sienna, look at me. I waited until her eyes met mine. None of this is your fault. Marcus is a predator. He's manipulative and charming, and he targeted you specifically because you're kind and trusting and successful. You didn't fail, he did. I'm pregnant with his child, she said, her voice breaking. How am I supposed to raise this baby knowing what their father is? How do I explain to Oliver that his daddy is in prison for murder and smuggling? How do I put our lives back together after this? The same way we've survived every other impossible thing, I told her. Together, one day at a time, with honesty and love and the knowledge that we're stronger than the people who tried to destroy us. Agent Mitchell returned, her expression grim. We have a situation. During the raid, Dmitry Volkov attempted to escape through a secondary tunnel exit we didn't know existed. There was an armed confrontation. 2 of his associates are dead, shot by federal agents in self-defense. Dmitri himself has been apprehended, but he's demanding to speak with you, Mrs. Hotway. Me? Why would he want to speak with me? He claims he has information about Richard's death that only you would want to hear. Information that Marcus doesn't know he has. Sarah's expression was apologetic. You don't have to do this. We have enough evidence without whatever he's offering. But he specifically requested you, and he's threatening to refuse cooperation if you don't at least hear him out. Sienna grabbed my hand. Mom, don't. You don't owe that man anything. But I was already standing. If he knows something about Richard's death, something that gives me more complete truth about what happened to my husband, I need to hear it. I've spent 3 years with questions. Maybe he has answers. They brought me to an interrogation room where Dmitri Volkov sat handcuffed to a table, his expensive suit rumpled and his face expressionless. He looked at me with those cold, calculating eyes, and something that might have been respect flickered across his features. Mrs. Hotway, thank you for coming. I'm told you have information about my husband's death. I do. But first, you should know that I had nothing to do with Richard's murder. That was entirely Marcus's decision. I don't kill innocent people without business reasons. He spoke like killing with business reasons was perfectly rational. When Marcus first approached my organization for a loan, he was already in debt to smaller operators. Gambling addiction, just like his father. He needed 300,000 euros immediately, or he was going to be hurt very badly. I don't care about Marcus's sob story, I said coldly. Tell me about Richard. Dmitri nodded. Marcus came to me the day after your husband died, asking for an additional loan. He needed money to pay off the boat rental company, to lose certain maintenance records that would have shown he'd tampered with the fuel system. I provided the loan, and I kept copies of all the evidence Marcus tried to destroy. Insurance, you understand. In my business, you always keep leverage. He slid a folder across the table with his cuffed hands. Inside were photographs of boat engine components showing clear signs of sabotage, rental agreements with Marcus's signature, and text messages between Marcus and a boat maintenance worker discussing payment for discretion regarding mechanical issues. This proves premeditation, Agent Mitchell said quietly beside me. This guarantees a murder conviction. Why are you giving this to me? I asked Dmitri. What do you gain? Cooperation credit for my own sentence reduction, obviously. But also, he paused, his expression becoming almost human for a moment. I have daughters, Mrs. Hotway, grown women with families of their own back in Russia. If someone had used their child the way Marcus used yours, had threatened them the way he threatened you and your grandson, I would want that person to suffer maximum consequences. What Marcus did to Oliver, using him in criminal operations, making him a tool that violates even my code. So I give you the evidence that ensures Marcus Brennan spends the rest of his life in prison for murdering your husband. You give me cooperation credit that might mean I see my daughters again before I'm too old to remember their faces. It was a transactional kindness from a man who dealt in transactions, but I took the folder anyway. Thank you. One more thing, Dmitri said as I turned to leave. The financial advisor Marcus wanted you to meet with next week? That was a professional who specializes in elder fraud. Once you'd transferred your money to his management, it would have been siphoned away slowly over years, untraceable through offshore accounts. Marcus wasn't just planning to steal your house. He was planning to take everything, leave you with nothing. I thought you should know the full extent of his betrayal. I walked out of that interrogation room feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Every revelation was another layer of Marcus's cruelty, another way he'd planned to destroy my family. But I also had the evidence that would guarantee justice for Richard, and sometimes that's the best closure you can hope for. Sienna was waiting in the hallway, her face anxious. What did he tell you? He gave us proof that Marcus murdered your father. Premeditated, planned, documented. I took her hand. We're going to make sure he pays for everything he's done. To Dad, to us, to Oliver. All of it. She nodded, squaring her shoulders in a gesture I recognized as pure strength inherited from generations of women in our family who'd survived worse than this. Then let's do it. Let's make sure that bastard never hurts anyone again. Agent Mitchell smiled slightly. I think that can be arranged. The trial took 11 months to reach its conclusion. 11 months of testimonies, evidence presentations, expert witnesses, and Marcus's increasingly desperate attempts to cut deals that the prosecution refused to consider. I sat in that courtroom for every single day, watching the man who'd married my daughter being systematically exposed as the monster he truly was. Dmitry Volkov's evidence proved devastating. The photographs of sabotaged boat components, the maintenance records Marcus had tried to destroy, the text messages arranging payment for silence, combined with Richard's meticulously documented financial investigation and the FBI's recorded confession, the murder charge was ironclad. Marcus's attorney tried to argue temporary insanity, claimed gambling addiction had driven him to desperation, but the jury saw through it. The premeditation was too clear, the cover-up too calculated. The federal charges for arms smuggling, money laundering, and organized crime came with their own mountain of evidence. Oliver's photographs, FBI surveillance footage, testimony from James Whitmore, who'd turned state's witness, financial records showing millions of dollars moving through offshore accounts. Marcus had been part of an international smuggling network that had operated for years, and the prosecution made sure the jury understood the full scope of his criminal enterprise. When the verdicts came back, I held Sienna's hand and felt her entire body tense. Guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit money laundering, art theft and smuggling, racketeering. The list went on and on. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without possibility of parole for Richard's murder, plus additional consecutive sentences for the federal crimes totaling another 60 years. Marcus looked at us one final time before they led him away. There was no remorse in his eyes, no apology, just cold hatred and the bitter knowledge that he'd lost everything. Sienna stared straight ahead, refusing to give him even the acknowledgement of her gaze. I simply felt relief that this man would never threaten my family again. Dmitry received 15 years for his cooperation, significantly reduced from the life sentence he'd faced. James Whitmore got 10 years and permanent disbarment. The other associates received sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years. The entire smuggling network that had operated through Charleston's hidden tunnels was dismantled, and the recovered artwork was returned to its rightful owners across Europe. The media coverage was intense and invasive. Charleston socialite exposes husband's murder plot. FBI busts international art smuggling ring. 6-year-old's photos crack major criminal case. We stopped reading the articles after the first few weeks. Oliver didn't need to see his face in newspapers, didn't need his trauma turned into entertainment for strangers. Sienna gave birth to a daughter 7 weeks after the sentencing. She named her Rachel, after my mother, deliberately choosing a name with no connection to Marcus's family. My granddaughter came into the world perfect and healthy, with Sienna's dark hair and eyes that hadn't yet decided what color they wanted to be. When the nurses placed Rachel in my arms for the first time, I cried tears that were equal parts grief and joy. "She'll never know him," Sienna said firmly from the hospital bed. "She'll know she has a biological father who made terrible choices and is in prison. But she won't know him. I'm filing for divorce and sole custody." Marcus signed away all parental rights in exchange for not contesting the divorce. He gets nothing. Not from me, not from our children, nothing. I looked down at Rachel's tiny face and felt fierce protective love surge through me. "She'll know her grandfather Richard, though. We'll make sure both children know about the man he really was. The good man who tried to protect us." Oliver adjusted to his new reality slowly, and with the help of a child psychologist who specialized in trauma. He had nightmares for months, woke up crying about bad men in tunnels and his father's angry face. But he was resilient in the way children can be, and gradually the nightmares became less frequent. He stopped asking when Daddy was coming home and started asking questions about heaven, whether Grandpa Richard could see him from there, whether Grandpa was proud of him for being brave. "Your grandfather is incredibly proud of you," I told him one evening as we sat in the garden, now peaceful without the threat of criminals operating beneath our feet. "You saved us, Oliver. You were scared, but you told me the truth anyway. That's real courage." The tunnels themselves became the subject of historical fascination once the criminal investigation concluded. The city sealed most of the entrances permanently, but they preserved a section for a museum exhibit about Charleston's Civil War history. I donated funds for educational programs, wanting something positive to come from the darkness that had hidden beneath my home for so long. My house felt different now, lighter somehow, despite everything that had happened. Or maybe I was different. I'd spent 3 years paralyzed by grief and doubt, questioning my judgment, letting Marcus manipulate me into giving up my power. But facing him, outsmarting him, bringing him to justice had reminded me who I really was. Not a vulnerable widow to be exploited, but a woman who'd built a successful business from nothing, who'd survived devastating loss, who'd protected her family when it mattered most. Sienna and both children moved into the main house with me. We converted Richard's study into a nursery for Rachel, painting the walls a soft yellow and filling the room with light. Oliver got the bedroom that had been Sienna's as a child, creating continuity and safety in a world that had proven unpredictable. Having them close brought me peace I hadn't felt since Richard died. My daughter and I had long conversations during those first months after the trial, working through the complicated emotions that came with discovering your husband was a murderer. Sienna felt guilt for not seeing the signs, shame for having loved someone capable of such evil, anger at having wasted 7 years of her life with a man who'd never been real. I listened and held her and reminded her that surviving doesn't mean you failed. It means you're strong enough to keep living. I keep thinking about all the moments that seemed normal at the time, she told me one night as we sat on the porch, watching Oliver chase fireflies in the garden. The way Marcus would come home late and say he'd been showing properties, how he discouraged me from handling our finances, said I was too busy with work to worry about money. The way he isolated me from friends by scheduling trips during their events, making me feel like I was choosing my career over relationships. It was all so subtle, so gradual, that I didn't recognize I was being controlled. That's how predators work, I said gently. They don't announce themselves. They seduce and manipulate and make you feel like everything is your idea. You're not weak for falling for it, sweetheart. You're human. Financially, we recovered most of what Marcus had stolen, though it took time and excellent attorneys. The offshore accounts were traced and frozen. The investments James Whitmore had managed were liquidated and returned to my control, minus the portions that had already been siphoned away. I ended up with roughly 70% of my original net worth, which was far better than the nothing Marcus had planned to leave me with. I started a foundation in Richard's name, providing support for families affected by financial fraud and domestic manipulation. It gave purpose to the pain, transformed our trauma into something that could help others recognize warning signs we'd missed. Sienna threw herself into architecture again, designing homes for women escaping abusive situations, creating spaces that felt safe and empowering. Oliver started second grade with a new therapist, new coping strategies, and the knowledge that he'd done something incredibly brave. His teacher called me one afternoon to say he'd written an essay about heroes that made her cry. He'd written about his grandfather Richard, who tried to protect the family, and about his grandmother Perla, who finished what Grandpa started. On the 3-year anniversary of the trial's conclusion, I took both grandchildren to Richard's grave. Oliver was 9 now, tall and thoughtful, with his grandfather's serious eyes. Rachel was 3, chattering constantly, pointing at birds and flowers with delight. We brought flowers and sat on the grass, and I told them stories about the man their grandfather had been. He would have loved you both so much, I said, watching Rachel try to catch a butterfly while Oliver listened intently. And he'd be proud of how we protected each other, how we told the truth even when it was scary, how we made sure justice was done. Do you think he can see us? Oliver asked, the same question he'd been asking for years. I think love doesn't end just because someone dies, I told him. Your grandfather's love is still here, in the way I protect you, in the way your mom works so hard to give you good lives, in the courage you showed when you told me the truth about the tunnels. That's how people live on, through the love they leave behind. We sat there until the sun started setting, 3 generations connected by loss and survival, and the determined choice to keep living despite everything that had tried to destroy us. Marcus had taken so much from us, but he hadn't taken this. He hadn't taken our ability to love, to trust again carefully, to build new lives from the ruins of the old ones. That evening, back at home with both children asleep and Sienna working late on a project, I stood in my garden and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace, Real, deep peace that came from knowing I'd done everything possible to protect my family. Richard would have been proud. More importantly, I was proud of myself, the woman who'd been paralyzed by grief 3 years ago, who'd let Marcus manipulate her into selling her business and doubting her instincts. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone harder, wiser, and infinitely more dangerous to anyone who might threaten the people she loved. I'd learned that intuition isn't paranoia, that protecting family sometimes means destroying illusions, that justice, while slow, is worth fighting for with everything you have, and that surviving doesn't make you a victim. It makes you a warrior. Marcus Brennan had tried to take everything from me. Instead, he'd given me something unexpected, the absolute certainty of who I was and what I was capable of when the people I loved were in danger. I was Perla Hotway. I was a widow, a mother, a grandmother, and a woman who'd brought down a criminal empire to protect her family, and I was finally, completely at peace.